If you believe these stories must be remembered, subscribe to Echoes of Valor and help keep history alive.
He was born in a world that would soon tear itself apart, and he would spend his life moving through the ruins it created. Richard Sorge entered history quietly, the child of a German engineer and a Russian mother, raised on the shifting frontier between two cultures. No one looking at the shy, intelligent boy could have predicted that he would become the most dangerous spy of the 20th century. The First World War changed him forever. At 18, he volunteered for the German army, driven by patriotism and youthful certainty. But the war crushed those illusions. A devastating shell wound nearly took his life and left him with a permanent limp and something even more significant, a growing contempt for militarism and nationalism that had dragged Europe into destruction. While recovering, Sorge immersed himself in Marxist literature, and the young idealist who had gone to war for the Kaiser returned disillusioned, radicalized, and searching for purpose.
That purpose came in the form of the Communist Party, and later the Soviet Military Intelligence Service, the GRU. Unlike many of his future colleagues, Sorge was no ideologue blindly following doctrine. He possessed something far more valuable: the mind of a scholar, the charisma of a diplomat, and the instincts of a predator. He was fluent in multiple languages, trained in economics, and able to slip into any social sphere. For the Soviets, he was a once-in-a-generation weapon. By the early 1930s, Sorge had already proven himself in Shanghai, navigating the chaotic underworld of international espionage with unsettling ease. Moscow needed a man who could go further, someone who could infiltrate the heart of Axis diplomacy in the Far East. Sorge was chosen not because he was the safest option, but because he was the only one capable of succeeding at something so dangerous.
In 1933, under the perfect cover of a German journalist and political analyst, he arrived in Tokyo. Everything about him served the persona: the sharp intellect, the German passport, the encyclopedic knowledge of European politics. Soon, he was welcomed into the circles of foreign correspondents, then diplomats, and eventually the German embassy itself. Tokyo, in the 1930s, was a city of coded conversations, political factions, and silent watchers. A place where one wrong word could mean disappearance. Yet Sorge moved through it with disarming confidence. He drank heavily, rode motorcycles recklessly, quoted Marx and Goethe in the same breath, and behind this flamboyant mask he studied his targets with absolute precision. By the time his network began to take shape, Sorge had already achieved what few spies ever manage. He became invisible, not because he hid in the shadows, but because he shone too brightly for anyone to imagine he could be a threat. He was the man who shouldn't exist, a German hero, a Soviet spy, and soon the most valuable intelligence asset in the Pacific.
Tokyo was a city of walls, political, social, and cultural. But Richard Sorge understood something most foreigners never learned. Every wall has a gate, and every gate has a key. His task was not simply to blend into Japanese society, but to infiltrate the world of diplomats, journalists, and military thinkers who shaped the empire's future. To succeed, he needed a network, one not built on fear, but on loyalty, ideology, and the irresistible force of his personality. Sorge began with the people closest to him. As a journalist for German newspapers, he cultivated friendships that seemed natural for a man in his position: foreign correspondents, embassy staff, political advisors. Few realized that every conversation with him was a quiet reconnaissance mission. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing every detail: who trusted whom, who drank too much, who hated Berlin's policies, who might be persuaded to share one harmless document.
The foundation of his network came in the form of Max Clausen, a gifted radio operator and one of the few people Sorge ever fully trusted. Clausen handled the transmissions to Moscow, encrypted messages carrying the most sensitive secrets of Germany and Japan. Without him, Sorge's intelligence would have remained trapped in Tokyo. With him, it became a lifeline stretching across thousands of miles. Then came Hotsumi Ozaki, the most extraordinary recruit in Sorge's career. Ozaki was a respected Japanese journalist, a political thinker, and a man with access to Japan's inner circles. Through him, Sorge gained something every spy dreams of, but almost none achieve: insight not into military movements alone, but into the minds of policymakers. Ozaki attended private meetings with Japan's leaders, including Prime Minister Konoe, and afterward would sit in Sorge's apartment, quietly revealing what had been said behind the sliding doors of power.
From these two pillars, the network expanded. Sorge drew in German diplomats disillusioned with Hitler's regime, Japanese officials frustrated with the direction of imperial policy, and individuals who simply admired his charisma. He never pressured them. He made them want to follow him. That was his true genius. The meetings were conducted with almost ritualistic caution. Notes were memorized, then burned. Conversations took place on long walks through crowded Tokyo streets, or in smoky bars where foreign journalists debated world events over glasses of whiskey. Clausen coded and transmitted the intelligence at carefully chosen hours, while Sorge maintained the public persona of a brilliant correspondent who drank too much and cared too little about politics.
Behind that mask lay some of the most valuable intelligence of the early 1940s. Detailed reports on Japanese military planning, insights into German-Japanese diplomatic tensions, and early indications of Japan's strategic priorities in Asia and the Pacific. By 1941, his network had become so effective that Moscow received information from Tokyo faster and often more accurately than German or Japanese intelligence services themselves.
Sorge had built something unprecedented, aspiring, operating at the highest levels of two Axis powers, fully trusted by both, completely controlled by neither. But the more successful he became, the more dangerous his position grew. In Tokyo, suspicion was a national instinct, and Sorge's brilliance, charm, and access
were already beginning to draw eyes in his direction. The invisible web was tightening, and soon it would begin to tremble.
By early 1941, Tokyo had become a city balanced on contradictions. Modern and ancient, militaristic yet cautious, confident but increasingly afraid of the storms gathering across the world. In the alleys behind the Ginza district, ordinary life continued. Lanterns flickered, bars filled with smoke, and geishas hurried through the night. But Richard Sorge saw Tokyo a different Tokyo, a capital where secret reports crossed polished desks, where generals whispered of war, and where Germany pressed its allies to take a harder stance against the Soviet Union. From his vantage point inside the German embassy, and through the eyes and ears of Hotsumi Ozaki, Sorge watched the Axis powers drifting toward catastrophe. What he uncovered would become one of the greatest warnings in espionage history.
It began with snippets of conversation, a German attaché hinting about a major operation, a coded telegram from Berlin describing the transfer of armored divisions, fragments of planning overheard at drunken embassy dinners. Sorge, with his razor-sharp memory and journalist's instinct, collected the pieces long before others realized they belonged to the same puzzle. Berlin was planning something vast, something reckless, a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. Through Ozaki, Sorge gained an even more critical insight. Japan's leadership was divided. Some within the Imperial Army believed the Siberian frontier was the next arena of conflict. Others argued that Japan should turn south toward the colonies of Britain, France, and the Netherlands. These debates were not abstract. They were the hinges upon which the future of the world would swing. If Japan attacked the USSR from the east, while Germany struck from the west, the Soviet Union would be crushed.
But Sorge's reports revealed the truth Moscow desperately needed. Japan would not attack the Soviet Union in 1941. Its strategic gaze remained fixed on Southeast Asia and the Pacific. This information alone could have changed the course of the war. But Sorge delivered more. On May 15, 1941, he sent an encrypted message through Clausen stating that Germany had finalized preparations for a massive invasion to begin soon, an operation codenamed Barbarossa. He reported with astonishing precision the scale of the build-up, the projected timing, and even the German expectation of victory within a few months. In Tokyo, Sorge continued to gather confirmation. German officials grew more careless as the date approached, believing themselves among allies. They mentioned the shifting of panzer groups, the relocation of Luftwaffe units, the rationing of fuel for the Eastern Campaign. Every detail strengthened Sorge's certainty. He sent warning after warning to Moscow. Every one was received. Almost none were believed. In the Kremlin, Stalin dismissed Sorge's reports as provocations or exaggerations. Even when Sorge transmitted the exact invasion date, June 22, 1941, Stalin scrawled in the margin of one message, "This is an English agent." While Stalin doubted, Sorge and his network in Tokyo grew increasingly alarmed. They had done everything possible, intercepted secrets, analyzed intentions, interpreted the currents of diplomacy,
and still the Soviet leadership walked blindly toward disaster. When German forces finally crossed the border at dawn on June 22nd, Sorge received confirmation through the embassy before most Soviet commanders did. His messages had been correct in every detail.
In that moment, the Tokyo spy ring understood both the power and the tragedy of intelligence work. To know the future is not the same as being able to change it. But Sorge was not finished. If Moscow had ignored his first warning, his second, the one that would determine the fate of the Eastern Front, would prove impossible to ignore.
By 1941, Richard Sorge had become one of the most successful and dangerous intelligence assets in the world. His network in Tokyo penetrated political circles so deeply that he could read the pulse of the Japanese government weeks before diplomats even sensed a shift. But mastery breeds enemies, and in the shadows of Tokyo, the Kempeitai had begun weaving a net around him. It started with whispers, a suspicious meeting here, an intercepted message there. Japanese counterintelligence didn't know who Sorge was, not yet, but they sensed that someone inside Tokyo was feeding Moscow's secrets that no outsider should know. And so they began pulling threads.
The first crack came from within his circle. Branko Vukalic, one of the network's key members, had been sloppy under pressure. A careless conversation, a face recognized by the wrong man. The Kempeitai took interest. Surveillance tightened. Files thickened. Sorge felt it, like a weight in the air, but he never allowed fear to disturb his rhythm. Intelligence work was a dance with danger. One misstep, and the music stopped forever. In October 1941, the trap finally sprang. The Kempeitai coordinated the arrests with clinical precision. Early morning raids, doors battered open, documents seized before they could be burned. Sorge was taken in iron restraints, his calm expression betraying nothing. He knew what Japanese interrogators were capable of. He also knew he could not afford to break. The questioning began immediately. First polite, then brutal. The Japanese wanted one thing: the identity of the man who fed Moscow their most guarded military secrets. Day after day, Sorge insisted he was nothing more than a journalist, an eccentric foreign correspondent obsessed with politics. But the Kempeitai were no longer guessing. They had followed enough breadcrumbs to realize they had captured someone extraordinary. On October 31, Sorge made a fateful decision, not out of weakness, but out of cold calculation. He confessed, fully, completely, astonishingly. Told them his name, his mission, his ties to Moscow, even the intel he had delivered. But what seemed like surrender was actually strategy.
Sorge believed, correctly, that the Japanese would never trade him to Germany. Hitler had publicly distanced himself from Soviet spies, even when they were ethnically German. And Moscow? They would simply deny he ever existed. By confessing, Sorge removed the incentive for torture while maintaining the dignity of a man who had outplayed the world's greatest powers. Yet the confession sealed his fate. For the next 3 years, he remained in a Japanese cell, isolated, starved, interrogated without end. But even in captivity, Sorge held firm. He never provided information that could compromise the USSR's future operations.
His network was already shattered. Protecting what remained was all he had left.
In November 1944, the verdict came. Richard Sorge, codename Ramsay, was sentenced to death by hanging. No appeals, no diplomatic rescue, no country claimed him. On the morning of his execution, he reportedly stood tall, calm, and unafraid. A man who had lived by deception, but died with clarity. His final words, recorded by witnesses, reflected both pride and defiance. The Red Army will win. He was right. Sorge's truth came at the highest price a spy can pay, but his work had already changed the course of a world war.
By late 1941, Richard Sorge had accomplished what few spies ever could. He had infiltrated the highest circles of power in Tokyo while secretly reporting to Moscow. Through his network, Sorge provided intelligence that would prove pivotal, not just for the Soviet Union, but for the entire course of World War II. Stalin, initially skeptical of warnings, finally acted on Sorge's reports that Japan had no intention of attacking the USSR in 1941. This crucial information allowed the Soviets to transfer divisions from the Far East to the Western Front, directly influencing the outcome of the Battle of Moscow. The story of Sorge's intelligence is not only about the movement of troops and the timing of military decisions, it's about the human element behind espionage. Sorge lived a dual life, outwardly a journalist and diplomat, inwardly a master of deception and coded communications. His apartment in Tokyo was a hub of clandestine activity. Microfilms, ciphered messages, and invisible ink were standard tools of the trade, but it was Sorge's ability to interpret and prioritize intelligence that truly made him exceptional.
As the months passed, Sorge's information continued to flow to Moscow with remarkable accuracy. Reports on Japanese military planning, discussions at the highest echelons of the Japanese government, and even the movements of American and British diplomats in Asia were funneled through his network. Each report was analyzed, encoded, and transmitted under constant risk of detection. The Japanese military police, the Kempeitai, were notoriously vigilant, and any misstep could have led to immediate arrest and death. Yet Sorge operated for years undetected, blending into Tokyo's social and diplomatic circles with remarkable skill. The strategic impact of Sorge's espionage cannot be overstated. By confirming that Japan would not open a second front in Siberia, the Soviets were able to focus their defenses against Germany. Entire armies were redeployed westward, fortifying positions that would later repel the Wehrmacht at Moscow and beyond. In essence, Sorge's intelligence bought the Soviet Union precious time at a moment when Hitler's Operation Barbarossa threatened to overwhelm the Red Army. It was a quiet intervention with profound consequences.
Ultimately, Sorge's story ended tragically. In 1944, after being unmasked, he was arrested by Japanese authorities and executed. Yet his legacy endured. His work demonstrated the immense power of intelligence, foresight, and meticulous planning. Unlike conventional battles fought on fields or seas, Sorge's victory was invisible. It unfolded in the corridors of power, in secret communications, and in the minds of decision-makers thousands of miles away. For historians and military analysts, Sorge remains a case study in espionage mastery.
The scale of his achievement, the audacity of his operations, and the direct influence on the fate of nations make him one of the most significant intelligence figures of the 20th century. Through Sorge, we understand that wars are not only won with tanks, planes, or rifles, but with information, timing, and the courage to act upon secrets others might dismiss.